Miki Hellerbach is a journalist, from podcasting to producing his own show and getting bylines and columns in top-tier publications like Complex and MTV News, amongst many others. Miki has excelled tremendously in the field. He's as humble as they come, despite his accomplishments, which makes this conversation so necessary and so special. I loved getting Mickey his flowers during our discussion, but I also loved being able to share his perspectives on a number of important issues. In our talk, we dive deep into the necessity of producer and engineer spotlighting in the music industry. We also go into the discrepancies between women's contributions to songs and the credit they're given in the liner notes. We also discuss men's health in the music industry and conversations happening around it. This interview is enriching, it's funny, it's illuminating. All of these touch points were made because that's the type of music journalist Mickey is. He's conscientious without being performative. He's analytical while still being accessible. He's also a remarkable human and helps bring that honestly flawed nature of people's existence to the forefront in an authentic and relieving way. I hope you have the best time listening to this conversation and check out Mickey's work after watching it. Enjoy. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the If Ever You're Listening podcast. I'm your host, Stanley C., and we have a fantastic journalist, content creator, podcaster, all the things in terms of music journalism, Miki Hellerbach on the podcast today. Thank you so much, Miki, for coming.
Thank you for having me, Stanley. I hope I'm not putting your full government out there right now, but another thing I feel super aligned with in talking with you is that you have a name, which I'm sure you've been told a million times, of one of the best ever instrumentalists, maybe of all time. And as you know, I have a Substack about producers.
Mm.
So the alignment here feels especially right because of that. So I'm excited to have the conversation.
No, it's my pleasure. My pleasure. If the listener, I hope you've done a little bit of research on Mickey, but if you haven't, by the end of this conversation, I hope you do some deep diving yourself because there's a lot to dive into what he does and writes about and appreciates about music. I find it really novel. So to get us started, I like starting at the beginning before all of your talent started showing themselves in the journalistic realm. Take me
Yeah.
back to little Mickey. Tell me kind of how you grew up and more
Mhm.
specifically, how did music enter your life growing up?
Yeah. Um, so I grew up in Baltimore. Because I'm wearing my Ravens hat today. Um, yeah, I moved there I actually moved there when I was two. My parents met at University of Massachusetts in Western Mass. But I was raised in Baltimore. All of my memories exist there. Baltimore was an incredible place to grow up. Specifically, I think I like had musical influence from like multiple directions. And I think I can even like sort of semi-reference one of my more recent Substack pieces, which was like a breakdown of the Neptunes, to sort of discuss it a little bit. So, and I just recently did another podcast with Patrick Hicks where I talked about sort of my mom and my dad's influence on me musically. So my mom is like my core musical influence from like in the house. Uh, and sort of the CDs that she would play. And there's also like a big road trip CD playing influence. So my big three that I like took from my mom that are just like sort of at the core of my musical identity would be Earth, Wind and Fire, Al Green, who is still my favorite singer to this day, and then Luther Vandross. Um, those are the big three. Those are the ones that connected with me the most deeply that she would play in the house. But then it eventually expanded, beyond just R&B. And my mom also, just to shout out the like local radio station in Baltimore, 95.9, she would play in the car too. So I would get the more sort of modern R&B stuff too. And then it expanded eventually a little beyond that with my mom, and she introduced me to funk, which obviously Earth, Wind, and Fire leans that way, but it's more soul. But then like Parliament is like straight from my mom, and then she would also is the person who introduced me to Fleetwood Mac and the Rumors album. I eventually like took her to see Fleetwood Mac in Baltimore, which was an awesome experience.
Nice.
Um, my dad had like a lesser musical sort of influence on me, but the stuff that he did show to me, I do still cherish. He actually went to the same high school as Billy Joel, not at the same time, just very little space between the two of them. So he showed me that. I don't know how big of a Billy Joel person I am specifically, but that's like key because it's like related to where he grew up.
Mm.
Um, but the big things that he showed me, I mentioned one of them on Patrick Hick's podcast, was this really funny song, which is Hocus Pocus by Focus, which is like a yodel rock song. But the big thing really is that I think about with him is the Are You Experienced album by Jimi Hendrix.
Mm.
That's like to me still just even in the entirety of the Hendrix catalog, and it may be just because my dad showed me the Are You Experienced album, that's his most complete body of work to me still. And it also like I actually haven't really thought through this, but there's something about like the sequencing and the way that that album put together that I feel like even to this day has influenced my taste in like album sequencing because I think it's one of the best sequenced rock albums I've still ever heard. And this is sort of funny. One of my favorite modern albums is the self-titled Kiwanuka album by Michael Kiwanuka, and I'm just realizing literally in this moment right now the similarities in the sequencing between that and Are You Experienced, which is very
Ooh,
interesting.
that's good.
Yeah, yeah. So that's in the house. And then sort of in the community around me, Baltimore's a very hip hop listening city. My mom definitely like introduced me to Rapper's Delight from her childhood and like knew all the words, which then translated to me knowing most of the words. The hip hop influence on me is very directly related to the community around me in Baltimore, and like the Neptune sound specifically is the first thing hip hop wise that like jumped out to me. And it's sort of funny. The and this is directly referencing the piece which you can check out on my Substack. Mystical Shake Your Ass was like my first favorite rap song. And it's like obviously like, I'm a little kid and I'm like, ooh, well, shake your ass. But so there's that level of things, obviously. But the production and the arrangement of that song, which is very funny to talk about in that context, but I encourage anyone who hasn't listened to that song in a while to go and really listen back to what Pharrell and Chad are doing instrumentally and like how much there is a connection between what I'm saying right now, something like Earth, Wind, and Fire and the Neptune's production on Shake It Ass, and then the Pharrell hook on that song and the way the delivery exists, it's almost like the Sinner scene, right?
Mm.
Like the translation of black music over a period of time.
Mhm.
And so that just like really grabbed me. And like now, retrospectively, I can really be like, wow, like I really hear the connection historically between those two places. Um, and then the other big thing in Baltimore is Baltimore Club, which I can't talk enough about. Jersey Club has had this big moment because Jersey Club has sort of had a crossover with like Sexy Drill in New York, and then also had Club Rap,
Yeah.
which unfortunately has never really materialized in Baltimore. But Baltimore Club predates Jersey Club. I grew up listening to that bass beat, the doom, 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 doom,
Mhm.
which was just around me everywhere in Baltimore. And I was hearing club mixes on the radio to shout out another radio station, 92Q, of those club mixes and different sort of classics, Dance My Pain Away, Watch Out for the Big Girls, and things of that nature. So that like had a big influence on me in some level of sort of the dance side was just within the community around me. I would be remiss also to not mention that like at a certain point I also was very into like boy band stuff.
Oh yeah. Oh
The
yeah.
first album I also had like the first that I got the CD was also the Space Jam soundtrack, which was funny enough my indirect introduction to Jay-Z because he wrote all the Bugs Bunny Daffy Duck raps, which
Yeah.
some people don't know about.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so there's like that's like the big amalgamation. It's like the soul and R&B from my mom, the rock from my dad, the hip hop from the community around me, the dance music and club music from the community around me, and then just the natural existence. And then also like the boy band stuff is like directly related. It's like my mom would listen to Boys to Men too, and Boys to Men would come on R&B radio. and that like existed. And I was born in 92, so I'm a 90s baby. So I was, and then moved to Baltimore in 94. So boy band era is like 98 maybe. But my mom's listening to R&B radio and Boys to Men. And I mean, my mom loves A Song for Mama, naturally.
Classic,
Um,
classic.
yeah, so that it's a long-winded answer, but obviously
No,
from
that's good.
two
That
music people, that's the only kind of answer I know.
I'm a Jersey. I'm from Jersey. I live in
Yeah.
Jersey. I'm born in 94, so you're speaking my
Yeah,
language. And
totally.
and the Jersey Club, I think a lot of even people in New Jersey forget that it comes from Baltimore. It comes south of us.
Right.
And we're
Right.
having a massive moment right now.
It's
I
amazing.
want us to capitalize off of it, kind of how New York did it with the drill artist that ended up exploding, like
Definitely.
a Pop Smoke or a not a Sexy Red and Ice Spice, because
Yeah.
we can do that too. The the tapestry of the artists that you're discussing
Mhm.
come from all sides of the music spectrum,
Yeah.
and this could make you very open to new genres, and you're that helps you give it seems to have helped you get a good language on how to describe music from all sorts of places.
Yeah.
When did you take it upon yourself to start writing about it? Was it in college? Was it in high school?
Yeah.
Where did you take the you're appreciating music
Hmm.
phase of your life to the I want to articulate what I'm listening to phase?
Totally. So, bear with me. This is also going to be a bit of a long-winded answer.
Mhm.
I have as you get a little older, you start eventually talking to people about the life that you have led and what has led you to where you are. And I have a sort of a very non-traditional trajectory to becoming a, professional music journalist. And so I want to start in early to mid high school when my cousin introduced me to rap blogs, which
Mm,
was like a very monumental point in switching me from music appreciation to music like dissection, intrigue, and discovery being at the forefront. Because I didn't know that that world existed. The things I remember most directly in the beginning of that just like blew my mind were Jay Electronica's early work and the Act One tape and Exhibit A that he showed me, and I was like, oh, this exists in this world that I didn't know existed. And Lil Wayne's mixtape era, Drought 3, Dedication 2. And so my cousin, who's from Long Island in New York, was sort of introducing me to that, and he's older than me.
mm,
So he was like, he sort of like grew up in the era of Tribe and MF Doom, and had that type of vibe too. But he was still very tapped into that type of stuff. So there was like this level of like music discovery that I still think is inherent in me becoming more of a music journalist later on. So this is a funny thing. So in Baltimore, my first passion, firstly, is acting, which is no longer a thing that I am
oh,
pursuing. I went to Baltimore School for the Arts for theater, which is the same school that many people may or may not know is where Tupac and Jada Pinkett met.
it's
Tupac actually also went to my middle school too, which is funny.
wow.
So uh, this is, of course, before he moved to California to
Mhm.
finish high school. So I went to college for musical theater.
Mm,
Had no necessary interest. I sing as well, and but had no interest in any journalistic path whatsoever. I was like scholarshiped for my musical theater program at University of Miami.
mhm,
This is a big moment still looking back in my life. So I don't feel like not it's sort of a funny way to say this. I don't feel like though I learned how to write or to more specifically to translate the way I naturally think into pen to page until college.
mm,
Funny enough, um, I got really good math scores on my SAT, but not good English scores, so I had to take an English 101 class.
wow.
But I tested out of the first level of math, but I had to take English 101. My mentor still to this day is a woman named Susan Leary, who was my professor. I took a English 101 class with her, and she sort of took note of my natural inclination to be an analyzer
Mm,
of things. Um, which is how she also thinks about the world. There's a specific sort of head first thinking person who like naturally wants to analyze what's going on. in things and also my natural inclination to analyze art. So the first piece that I wrote in that English 101 class, funny enough, through her guidance, was a piece dissecting album covers and using the album cover as like a basically a palette or a reference to discuss specific artists' interest in the afterlife.
Mm,
And it had to do with the 27 Club and that kind of thing, but not just being like, at that point, I don't think I was mature enough. It would be a very different piece now because I would talk about mental health and sort of like have that weaved through, and we can talk about my men's health stuff soon. Um, but at the time, it was really about how the album covers were expressing a distinct interest in the afterlife. So my favorite one was like the Nirvana one. So
mm,
I always forget, mix it up when I say it. So Nevermind is the one with the baby. So
yep.
it's like this picture expression of the beginning of life is Nevermind.
Mm,
Then In Utero, which is like the words are expressing a actual birth, is a picture of like an angel where you can see their
mm,
inside. And so the dichotomy of those two was really interesting, especially given the trajectory of Kurt Cobain. And so, yeah, so then I was like, whoa, this is a way to like channel the way that I naturally think in a way that I didn't know existed. So that was very like essential for me.
mm.
So I was going and doing my musical theater degree, and then eventually me and Miss Leary co-created a class, which was analyzing the television show Lost,
Yeah.
like a classic novel. And we wrote like 20-ish page papers over the course of a semester, had nothing to do with my major. She really wanted me to go to grad school right after, but I didn't even have, because I was doing such a, people talk about theater degrees as fake school, but I was like doing 18 credits a semester while being double cast in shows for, years. So I just didn't have enough credits to get a minor, which makes it hard to sort of translate into that. And also, I was still interested in acting.
Mm,
Um, but I moved to New York, pursued acting, did a few different things that I'm proud of in that time, sort of fell out of love with the pursuit of said thing, which is a thing they don't tell you enough early on, which is you have to love the pursuit of something, not just the doing of the thing.
yes.
Um, has been a big sort of revelation in my late 20s, early 30s.
Mm,
And also made some music at that time with people who I met in New York, got much more interested in building friendships with music people, naturally.
mhm.
Um, and then sort of got the bug back, hit Miss Leary back up. She introduced me to Duotrope, which is a more educational I'm not going to use the right word here. What's the whatever the word is for academic
Yep.
um, style of writing where you sort of pitch ideas, you write for free. Because I was not necessarily super educated on, I didn't go to journalism school, so I wasn't educated on the music journalism world. Started there, start to build a portfolio, sort of transitioned out of the other more performative or performance styled art that I was doing, and was starting to write for a bunch of different places for free. Pandemic hit,
Mm,
and I really like locked in. There was nowhere to go. I couldn't like go to studio sessions, go, kick it with musicians and make music or go perform. So I really locked in on the journalism, and I was still for sure writing for free and then really building a portfolio in the places that I was writing for free and talking to a bunch of different cool musicians I didn't even realize I would be able to have access to early in my career, which was crazy. And then I fell in love with interviewing people. And then eventually, I editor at Complex took notice of a piece I had done where I interviewed James Blake, which is still to me remarkable that I did it so early on in trying to pursue music journalism. But it's sort of a funny thing that you realize is like not as far away from you as you think it is when you first enter. Um, and because he was also researching pieces or recent pieces because he was also going to interview him, and I saw he followed me, pitched him a bunch of times, and eventually got my first what I would call major byline at Complex. And I actually, funny enough, leading to my Substack in a very real way, is I interviewed the producer of Cardi B's Up. which is a young Serbian kid named Young Dizza who has produced many things after as well. But I was really intrigued by searching inside the credits
Mm.
um, to see that there was this sort of world of European producers who desired, through talking to him too, that desired to sort of break through in the US and what that process was like and what the YouTube type beat world was like. And from a European perspective, where it's like you're getting influenced by Memphis piano, but you live in a small town in Serbia, what that's like. And
Mm.
yeah, so that was the sort of where everything fully started to be like, okay. The complex thing was like the first also of any, and I definitely had my successes in acting, but there was just something about like the feeling of that moment that made me feel a little bit more in the game
Mm.
than any of my other pursuits. And with an like a very clear like I see how this now allows me to like on my own within my own ability to leverage this into other places because it's like I have a complex byline. I can put my piece in every pitch email that I have now. Um, and people will take it more seriously. And yeah, that felt really valuable. And I like still really am so grateful for that pitch acceptance and grateful that I had such an interest in it, which is obviously carried to stuff that I'm even, building on my own. But yeah, that's my sort of Marvel origin story.
It's a fantastic origin story. Please drink water because I'm going to start giving you your flowers now for the listener.
Oh, thanks, man.
Not only is Miki in the game, I would consider him a key player in the music journalism game. Not only for the people he's able to interview. I'm going to name a few of them just so you're aware. If you're just listening, this is when you start listening closely, but also based on how he's interviewing them. These aren't just, how did you make this hit song? Who are you dating right now?
Yeah.
Miki is going deeper into, and we'll get, and I want to talk more about like how did you get to this place, because I think it makes you a really novel a writer, interviewer, creator in this space. He's asking about their mental health. He's asking about how their upbringing influenced their music. He's deciphering, especially in a few of the interviews. I'll start naming them after this. What in their life influenced a certain song, and like you'll talk about their previous self to their current self, and then you'll ask basically how did you break that gap. And I think a lot of interviewers don't do that type of deep dive when it comes to analyzing an artist in front of them, almost psychoanalyzing them, but in a respectful way. You're not like being their therapist, but the interviews that I've seen you do and read that you've done has shown me elements of artists that I feel like I knew in a new way. And I want to give you that credit because you're showing they're a broader picture on who they are. Actually a more human version of who they are. So I'll flowers. I just wanted to give that right there. Um,
Thank you, man.
no problem. So let's start naming. Let's start naming. So we have Russ. We have at the Grammy Museum. Huge interview. I'm gonna put it in the description. We have Elliot Wilson, kind of like one of the freaking godfathers of this music journalism space.
Yeah.
Um, we have Big Sean. I mean, it's we have James Blake, and he's in multiple publications. My new question for you though is, when you started getting in and you're making a little momentum and you're feeling good about yourself in this space, how are you thereafter making decisions on what pieces, what columns to write, and who to interview?
Oh, I mean, it's first of all, I don't want to act like I have complete leverage to write about whatever I want whenever I want, because that's not true. So, whenever I have an idea that I believe in, I will still cold pitch whatever publications I haven't written for.
Mm.
But it's every piece is absolutely different. There will be I've done everything from like a direct PR contact that is pitching me an artist. Um, and we sort of work together upon how we're going to present it to the publication and how the angle that I want to take on it, and go through that sort of direct process to having an idea that like comes to me in a dream and then throwing an email to a an editor that I've already developed a rapport with, crossing my fingers, sometimes getting lucky, sometimes getting a very clear and immediate rejection. And that is just what it is. It's a constant, and like just to reference what I said before, is like you gotta love that. There is some, you have to love that process of being able to maneuver in whatever way that you can. And I mean, you mentioned the Rust thing. The Rust thing was like, and he described it in our conversation, which I thought was cool. It was like a blessing I wasn't expecting. Like it didn't, I had talked to him and I had pitched the piece at Men's Health with Russ over a period of like months going back and forth. Funny enough, which is people, it's, inside baseball. It had really been, I had pitched, I had gotten a relationship with a rapport with an editor over there, and I had like pitched multiple sort of ideas surrounding rappers and mental health and the sort of movement of that has existed semi a little bit before, and then is a sort of reverberating thing from Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers.
Mhm.
Um, and that was the eventual thing that aligned with one of their already functioning columns that was existing. And, but that was over an extended period of time. And then sometimes by being persistent in one thing, then on the other end, you get this other cool thing. Um, but yeah, there's no like one way to answer how I choose what I do. It's all such a sort of collage of different avenues to arrive at a piece.
No, I think that's good because you're making the realistic. You're like what most of my audience is members that are either starting in the
Yeah.
field of artistry or they're journalists or they're just
Yeah.
fans. I kind of those are like the three main buckets my listeners are. And
Yeah.
somebody getting in, looking at what
Yeah.
you've done, and they're like, "How does that work?" I'm glad you gave really
Totally.
realistic. You're not we don't the writer themselves doesn't have that much say. If you're writing for a publication, you kind of everything has to get approved, everything has to be greenlit, and most of the time you're getting things
Yeah.
back. So
And you get lucky. Like it's like like I am not a staffed writer at a
yeah,
publication. So I'm not in the Slack channel or going to the meetings. So I don't know what they're talking about or
yeah.
what the direction is that they're going in.
Mm,
I'm going based off of what they already have sometimes and seeing how that aligns. And then also like finessing relationships with people that I meet naturally in the world from like work appreciation, or someone introduces me to someone else who then gets me a rapport with a different editor. And just sometimes, though, I'll hit at the exact right time that they're looking for the exact right thing. And you, the cliche is correct. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So, but yeah, it's a necessity to do your best to um, research beforehand to see how close to alignment you can actually proactively get, and then sometimes it's just you get lucky.
And one thing you've mentioned a couple times, this is not in my pre-written notes, is relationship building and building a rapport.
Mm.
How important has relationships been in your career thus far, and how have you gone about building relationships from nothing to close-knit relationships that have sprung business opportunities?
Totally. Uh, if there is one thing I will say to start out this is I cannot look back and say that there was one time. I want to make sure I'm actually being honest about this. I don't think I've ever missed a deadline. I think if I ever did, and it's like, I feel like if I did, it would like be at the front of my brain.
Yep.
But it is garnering the relationship is multifaceted, and it happens in multiple different ways. Being professional, being a nice person always helps, of course. But then proving your professionalism by hitting the deadline with something and putting your best foot forward in doing so. Um, Once you have garnered that rapport is if there's anything that's I think essential and has led to, of course, people wanting to reaching out to me with assignments when that does happen. Um, but yeah, as far as garnering the relationship, I don't know if I have any wizardry to offer. It's mostly just because there isn't any magic. It's sometimes it is literally cold pitching and getting lucky hitting someone at the right time. I cold pitch all the time and don't get responses still, for sure. And then staying on top of it and being locked into what direction publications are going in and the type of things they might like. And I've also had moments too where like something works that aligns with something I'm naturally interested in, and I'll get in a rhythm too. And that's always, I mean, that's always the most fulfilling because that creates consistency where you're like filling, as a freelancer, a gap in what a publication is doing, and you notice it, and then you're like, okay, I'm going to pitch similar things that I'm always kind of thinking of. And sometimes in a few circumstances, which anyone who's in journalism can relate to, a few times that has happened and I've gotten in a rhythm and then it sort of just stops. Or there will be mass layoffs at a publication and that relationship goes away. That is another sort of difficult side of it. But yeah, it's you know, being as aware as possible, uh, being as kind and respectful as possible, and understanding that everyone has a million things going on. And yeah, and then sometimes just going with your gut.
No, that's fantastic advice, and I think being kind and respecting people's time, but also being on time. I could also say Mikey was early to this. He was in the waiting room before I even cut on the Zoom. So like that, he's consistent across the board, across
Hmm.
or me and 100 other people can say the same thing. Um,
Mm.
but that goes a long way. That shows these people that people are taking you seriously and that they really want to spend time with you and work with you and do the great thing that we get to do. As
Yeah,
somebody who does this on the more independent side, I feel like it's a gift that we get to do this type of stuff and
yeah,
we get to geek out and then people want to read what we put out. That
yeah,
doesn't even make sense in my brain, but it's
yeah,
the coolest gig. Um, and part one of those places where we get to geek out together is Substack. So I want to talk more
yeah,
about your Substack inside the credits.
yeah,
Love the Substack, love the vision. I can't find anything close to it in the Substack space. Kind of your niche is very, very novel. Talk to me about why you chose to spotlight producers and engineers in the industry related to songs and artists that we're already familiar with out of all of the other key players in song making.
yeah.
Why just the producers and the engineers?
Yeah. So, I'm glad we already sort of talked about like the birth of the idea. And it was something I sort of already naturally was always very interested in. I liked the song. I'd go check the credits. I will also just shout out Tidal because their crediting is the easiest to navigate of all the streaming services. So that's been really amazing rather than having to go on like All Music and sort of do it if for people who know
Mhm.
who are real music crazy people like me who go in there and really like navigate everything. And so the reason for it is because first and foremost, it's a reflection of my natural interest, then became my natural beat within journalism, which was covering producers because I was the most interested in them. Uh, a thing that I did actually in 2021, just out of this natural progression and interest, is I actually did a column for a small publication in the UK called GWAP, where for I believe 24 weeks straight, I interviewed a producer a week, which really got me in the rhythm of it. And there's two things that I like learned from doing that experience, which is I feel perhaps the most enlightened I ever do uh, in interviews talking to producers, and I am sort of baffled by how, on average, how much more rounded and interesting their perspective can be on the music making process. And am baffled still with, obviously, I think there's like been a progression, and I've been part of a bit of a wave that has existed in highlighting producers more, by a lot of really cool people who are journalists. And shout out Thomas Hobbs, who worked it did a column at OK Player for a long time for sure, because I've interviewed him on a previous podcast, but he's done really cool work with producers too. But I still, in sort of major publications, the sort of balance or ratio of vocalists to producers that are covered in a very legitimized sort of profile way is like way off kilter. Because I mean, technically, there's probably more producers who are professionally working,
Yeah.
who have done so much more interesting stuff. So I have, since I've sort of discovered my passion for it, have developed a firm belief that producers consistently should be covered with as much dignity and in such grandiose ways as big vocalists are. I think I saw at one point there was a thing where I just Googled it because I was just curious of like, for Rolling Stone, like what is the amount of, like, how many producers have like had covers? And it's like
Mm.
in the last like 10 years, and it was like one and a half. Like Pharrell like shared a cover. And this might not be the case from when I Googled it, because it may have been a year or two ago when I did, but I was like, whoa. I was like, my
He probably
guesstimation.
wasn't covered for his producing work. He probably was covered for his art or his Louis Vuitton or for his artist work. Wow.
Right, right, right. And that's, again, not to say that like producers aren't covered. They are. But yeah, I just, it's definitely become a passion of mine. I'd feel remiss to not like discuss like another element of it here that is like a thing I still grapple with in the producer world, since we're getting into this conversation. And I wrote about this in my sort of end of the year thing last year. And it's the like lack of women producers that are covered, but also like exist in the credits, because that's, and also like talking about like the lack of producer coverage, it feels like just not quite right to me to not mention this also interesting side of it,
Mm.
which is uh, that in my searches through the credits that I've done through Substack, it's still so infrequent how often I find women within the credits of the music that I love.
Mm.
And do want to shout out Addison Rae here, of all people, who has an all-female producer team, which is like a unicorn
Mm.
in music. It is an incredibly progressive thing that is being talked about, but I still think not enough. They actually just had a piece in Billboard for the trio of them, which I think is awesome.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, I had an interesting sort of trajectory with this, which was I actually ranked the best producers of the year for OK Player in 2021, I believe. And I presented a list to my editor, which did not include any women, because I was trying to accurately rank based off of the musical output that was in the sphere of OK Player and be like, well, this is the list of credits. And very rightly, my editor was like, we need to consider the women who exist in this space. And I was like,
Got it.
you are correct. And I did.
Mm.
And then I had that thought of like, where are the women producers? Do they just not exist? And it was like, of course, there's probably misogyny of being in studio spaces and not wanting to be in those male dominated environments that exist. But to be real about this, it also is the same for female vocalists.
Yes.
They mostly have male producers, which is still an interesting thing I think needs to be dissected more. And then I had another discovery the year after, when I had just gotten onto TikTok, and I naturally, of course, given my sort of natural trajectory here, started getting really interested in these pages of instrumentalists and producers who are on TikTok, sort of presenting their art there.
Mm.
And I pitched another piece of that same editor, and he was like, "Oh, you have a TikTok piece, a list for TikTok?" let's go. So, and so I was like, 10 instrumentalists and producers you should follow right now. Eight out of the 10. And this is, again, when I was creating the first list, it was through directly just who are the producers with the major credits for the artists who are making the music that I deem as the most intriguing. This is my actual first list. And then with the that list, just off of my preference, things that were coming to me, a 30-year-old man in the algorithm, 8 out of the 10 were women. And I was like, oh, that's where they are. They're all creating their own spaces to showcase their art in these like online spaces so they don't have to be a part of probably a toxic or misogynistic
Mm.
existence within these studios where the music's being made or communities. Yeah, and I don't know. I found that really fascinating. That was a little bit of a tangent off of your
Oh, that's
question.
good. That's really, really good. I'm
um,
keeping that in because I see it also with Olivia Rodrigo's band. She tours with an all female band. Um,
awesome.
there are some of the new crew, the new generation. They're
Yeah.
very cautious and very cognizant of this. Um,
Hmm.
and I'm seeing some inroads being made. But like you're saying, it's
Yeah.
nowhere close to where it should be or it needs to be. But starting these conversations are continuing these conversations that aren't happening enough, I think is something we're doing, pushing things in the right direction. Another element of the music industry I see that doesn't get talked about enough that I do see you bring up and address through your work and your articles and your interviews is mental health, men's mental health, and
Mm-hmm.
specifically your pieces on. I didn't expect when I was doing my due diligence and doing my research, I was actually really deeply into those articles. And you have really cool kind of dissection, but I was like, how does Russ think about his mental health? Like, how does Big Sean think? So, going deeper
Yeah.
into that, kind of talk to me about how do you go about interviews in that way? Why did you decide to highlight that? Because mental health, in terms of male artists, we're trying to be more dominant. We're trying to be cool. Very,
Yeah.
very few times are we talking about what we're insecure about or addictions that we have or things that we're trying to hide from others. So what brought you to that place to want to talk about it, and how do you go about those interviews?
Yeah. So I don't think I would have broached the subject if it weren't for my own foray into therapy. Uh, because I would have felt incredibly fish out of water and unqualified to talk about it. Um, which I did I would say, pretty stereotypical thing, uh, which is turned 30, had a bit of a what am I doing with my life? Where am I at right now? I'll break down. And I hit a bit of a low point and decided to seek help myself for the first time. Um, and it wasn't a foreign thing to me based off of like my immediate vicinity and family who have in various ways sought mental health help on their own too. But as a man in society was not a thing that I naturally had any inclination to accept was something I also needed.
Mm.
And I think the same probably can be said for men artists who are navigating the industry and love music as much as I do and love making it on their own terms. Uh, I, I mean, particularly Russ and Big Sean had somewhat similar trajectories in finding therapy themselves. Um, and then aligned with, of course, me foraying into therapy, my favorite artist of all time did an album about therapy, which is Kendrick. And I mean, just to, I'll put this out in the world whenever I can. If I could ever just talk to Kendrick about his mental health journey, that would be, I wouldn't know what else to pursue after that.
Mm.
So,
Keep putting it out there. Keep putting it out there. I can see it. I can see it.
yeah, right. I mean, I've wanted to interview Kendrick for as long as I've wanted to interview anyone, but that specifically, I would be very interested in. Um, but yeah, so the alignment of my own path, and the trajectory of men in hip hop expressing their forays into that, which was a pretty, new thing.
Very, very
Um,
taboo too, still.
Still, yeah. I mean, well, there's been a very reverberating effect since Mr. Morale,
Yep.
which has been pretty incredible to watch. The Rust thing, I will say, was specifically interesting for me, because, and this is not outlined in the exact piece I wrote as far as my parallel to him, but we did talk about it, I think, a little bit on stage at Grammy Museum. Um, I had just in therapy done an exercise, which is being talked about actually a lot in music now, not just with Russ, which is how we decide to speak to our inner child.
Yes.
Uh,
Yep.
and that concept was completely foreign to me. I had never, and it was like incredibly, and still is a thing I have to like check in on, in my own work on myself. But it was it was just one of those sessions where you walk out and you're like, whoa.
Mm.
Well, it's draining as emotionally, but also it just was a real like revelatory understanding for me, the realization of how I needed to work on switching how I was doing it. And Russ has a song called I Love You Boy on his Santiago album, which is a very key, and I've talked to him about it now multiple times, switch in the entirety of the way that he was thinking about making music and being an artist because of his therapy. But the song I Love You Boy was directly out of him doing a similar exercise with his therapist, finishing the exercise, logging off on his Zoom therapy session, and then making that song. And so when I heard it, I was like goosebumps. Oh my God, Russ, it literally made a direct song with in the context, of course, his own personal trauma story, etc. That is a direct reflection of the sequencing of me doing that same exercise in my therapy session.
Mm.
So, to go all the way back to your question, which is like, how do I approach? I wouldn't have if I didn't have the experience myself. It wouldn't have been a thing that was a thought in my mind to pitch. But when I feel generally less insecure about broaching the subject in the room because I have experienced myself with it.
Mm.
Um, so I can always, and sometimes this doesn't make the official published transcripts, but because they're not about me, they're about the artist, which is essential when the transcripts are published. Um, I will introduce a question from my own, this is what I've experienced and what I've seen in your music that relates to my direct experience with my own mental health journey. Can we talk about it? So then I have found in those moments, it sort of reveals a more, as you've talked about, sort of centered human, raw, vulnerable answer.
Mm.
Because it's much more of a us relating to each other's journeys than I'm an interviewer asking you how your mental health journey's going.
Yeah. No, I think
Yeah.
that's so powerful. And if you don't read anything of his work, please read these conversations. They're very, very important. And as we're discussing it, the trend is changing. And I think these articles, these conversations are going to only grow. So it's good to start where we're at in the conversation about men's mental health, and hopefully more artists also start to seeing that type of stuff and say, okay, maybe I do need help. I look up to Big Sean, I look up to Kendrick, I look up to Russ. If they can do it, I can do it. Um, I am very aware of time right now, so we're going to do a speed round. We're going to do three
Okay.
speed questions. We'll see how fast you can answer these questions. Um,
Sounds good.
Within a minute. Let's try to do within a minute. I have
I'll
like
try.
four, but I'm gonna try to do three maybe. If you could do three really
Okay.
fast, we'll do the fourth one. The
Sounds good.
first one is, what article of yours do you think is the most underrated or most underappreciated?
Hmm. Oh, it's gonna
I
take
know
me
it's a tough one.
15 seconds to think about it. Um,
Yeah, please.
oh, underrated, underappreciated. I I don't know. That's such a hard question to answer because there's not one that like is sitting with me or like people really should have given me my
True.
flowers for this one.
Or
I
maybe what
like
it might be more of like what you put the most into. Maybe not. It doesn't matter what the reception was, but you were very proud when it went out.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm still like I'm just so proud of my because it's like it's such a reflection of that like analysis I talked about earlier in a new more like developed journalistic form and it's pinned on my Instagram. But I did a Kendrick piece where I talked about him as a cinematic narrator and how that pattern was something that he picked up on Section 80 and carried through the rest of his catalog and made direct film parallels
Mm.
to each of the cinematic narrators that he chose. And also, just to be clear, because I wrote it before GNX, he also has one on GNX, which is the woman who is singing mariachi music throughout the album is exactly like a cinematic narrator. And I actually think it's very similar to how mariachi exists in Robert Rodriguez movies, just to put that out there. So that piece I just like still really love because it is like so it relates to like the birth of me as a writer, but then in a much more developed context. So if you read anything, uh, the mental health pieces are very dear to me, but I just love that Kendrick piece.
Now that
Also came to me in a dream, and my editor
I
accepted it.
I love everything that you just said. I did read that one. I did not think about the GNX part of that though. I'd never thought about that being the narrator. So I'm gonna
Yeah,
listen to that album again, which it won't be hard. The next thing is, ooh, we can go in a couple different directions. I have two questions. One is, what are you listening to these days?
yeah,
Give me maybe two or three artists, producers, or songs.
yeah. So I'm gonna do albums.
Even better.
There is uh these are the most exciting albums to me this year. One, and it's because of the progression of sound, and also for at least the first two of them, both of the artists are producers themselves,
Mm,
and they are inherent to their producing process, which is Tu Hollis out of LA, who is an incredible sort of hybrid artist of rap, EDM, pop, and emo music, and he has a very emo style to his vocals, which is unbelievable and is like a perfect example of like hooking into something I'm familiar with and taking it to the stratosphere, and in his progression, making me interested in styles of music I'm not that interested in because of his influence from them. Next is Jim Legacy. If you're not talking about how amazing Jim Legacy is, we have different ears. He is like of the most progressive artists that exists, and his amalgamation of all of the different styles of, to name his album, Black British music that he puts together seamlessly is unreal. The other ones I want to talk about, the one that's at the front of my mind is this guy named Junbo, who is a Vietnamese Chinese
mm,
alternative drill rapper from Southeast London.
ooh,
And I'll talk about them also in the context of this UK rapper named Joe James, who are both really amazing, what I would call alternative drill artists, meaning they have a semi-similar drill flow, which I think like the UK drill style and flow feels very similar in the like inherent like naturalness of it to like Baltimore or Jersey club.
yes.
Um, and so like they're using the flow that is like, rap was invented in the United States, but the UK drill flow specifically was invented in the UK. So they're using that cadence and expanding it still, but rapping over much more alternative, a lot of the times jazz influenced beats, which is like remarkable to me.
So
Of
cool.
course, with this like a half Vietnamese, half Chinese kid from Southeast London is also, you're never gonna hear that anymore, except for him. Super individualized. Well, that's three. You asked for three.
That's
What can I
three.
give
No,
you?
you're and three. I can't wait to listen to
Yeah,
the last one. Love rounding out in conversations about this. because you've given so much through just your life experience, through your stories, through your analysis. Your people are picking up advice. But what's the best advice that you've been given in your career up to this point?
Hmm. uh this is I know what I want to say is uh I'm going to quote Isaiah Rashad, and it's an indirect advice, which is, I smoke weed, I hate advice.
That's advice.
I I actually don't smoke weed, so it's not necessary. But the thing about that is, and I feel like I've been waiting to like talk about this for a very long time, funny enough. Um, in my high school, which was acting high school, they had people come in and give us advice all the time, and it was always so different.
Mm,
And it's because like you can listen to people and what their experiences are, but and I may have even mistakenly done it on this podcast, but anyone who tells you you should do something,
yeah.
that is because it worked for them.
Mm,
So it take anything that is resembling advice with a grain of salt,
yep.
because I'm a white boy who grew up in East Baltimore and was born in 92 and has a 90s perspective. And so what has worked for me may or may not work for you. So shout out Isaiah Rashad.
Shout out Isaiah Rashad. I do think what you've done, I think advice is also like what people do. And I think there are lessons from your life that you may not even know like was the advice, but you've lived a lot of. So that's why I never ask the person, give my listeners advice. I say, what advice did you hear? So,
Totally.
so from there they could take it or leave it, or from there
Yeah,
they can extrapolate what they want. But I think
totally.
the intangibles is like the hard work. It's building those relationships. It's taking a chance, taking a pivot. All those are kind of objective. It doesn't your race, your background, your timeline. People have done
Mhm.
that in the early 20th century. They did that in the 1200s. They could do it now. I think those type of timeless pieces of advice, which you've done, which you continue to do, and why I'm a huge fan,
Thanks.
is the things that uh I'm proud of you for doing, and I hope more music journalists take initiatives the way you've taken initiatives and taken pivots the way you've taken pivots, and are
Yeah.
able to be vulnerable in your conversations with artists, because I think we need more of that in journalism. And there's a lot of journalists that, want to be huge and get a lot of attention, or want to be like streamers. And we didn't get to talk about Spot On. I we'll talk offline
The
about that.
spot. Yeah.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
spot, and how you fuse food and music, but
Yeah.
all these risks, all these directions are really, really great. And I want to thank you again for being on the If Ever You're Listening podcast, and thank you for sharing your insights in your analysis of music with the greater world.
Oh, thank you for having me, man. I will give a quick double plug, if you don't mind,
Of course.
here at the end. So, The Spot, which he's talking about, is my interview show where we fuse food and music. I take artists to their favorite hometown eatery and use food as a lens to have a deeper conversation about music, the artist, and the person. Please follow us on Convos at The Spot on Instagram and TikTok. I have a bit of an exclusive for you, which we can talk about a little off camera too, and it's sort of like ping ponging off of our mental health conversation, and this hopefully will be exciting for you too to know about. Me and Sydney, aka Nieli, who you also had on your podcast,
Yeah, yeah.
uh, are doing an event together, which she reached out to me about, and we are still developing. But we have a name for it and a name for our first event in LA, which is a live listening event, which fuses um, political, musical, and five senses analysis of songs with a theme. Um, and the name of our hopefully continuing program that we do is called Crate Digest. And the first one will be called either, which we'll see once the flyer goes out, and maybe you can link it, is either Big Boys Don't Cry or Boys Don't Cry, and is literally going to be about the range of male vulnerability in music.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Thank Enough said. That's how we close. Thank you again. You're the best. Talk soon.
Yes, sir.